So in this video, I am going to lay kind of the foundation of our historical context for the Anglo-Saxon um, period. Not necessarily all of the medieval period because we've got a lot of stuff to cover, but certainly up until the Norman invasion of 1066. So I'm going to talk about the Anglo-Saxons. I'm going to talk about Anglo-Saxon poetry and a little bit about how there came to be Anglo-Saxons in England to begin with. So buckle up. We're going to move a little fast. And we're going to travel about 1,000 years. So I have outlined all of the important events of our unit. So we're going to cover this period of time, and I'm not going to talk about all of these today, but we're going to talk about these events moving forward in the next couple of weeks. So I can hear you guys now say, Miss Swan, this is not a history class. Why are we talking about so much history? Well, there's an easy answer to that. In order to understand a people, in order to understand a country's literature, in order to understand the significance of it, you've got to understand the goings on that happened historically, socially, contextually, because if you don't understand what's going on historically, if you don't understand what's going on culturally, if you don't understand the people and what's happening in the time, you're not going to understand the literature and the value of it. And the significance of it. So with every unit, I'm probably going to do a little bit of historical context for you guys because it makes sense to do that. So, and plus we're talking about the literature chronologically through a period of time. So, anywho, so the medieval period, which is, it stems from the Latin phrase for middle and age. So the Middle Ages can be broken down into three branches. There's the Anglo-Saxon period, which is what we're going to be covering this week. There's the Anglo-Norman period, which we're going to be talking about next week. And then, of course, there is the Middle English course, which is the last 2 weeks of our unit. So Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Norman, and Middle English is a way to distinguish between the evolvement of the evolution, not involvement, the evolution of language. And we can see that progression if we look at them in those three sections. So before we talk about all of that, in the beginning, England was inhabited by Celtic-speaking groups called Britons. Now, keep in mind that during this time, there are no real boundaries in terms of countries. You've got a bunch of independent tribes that go around vying for power. And what makes England kind of different than a lot of the other lands, like the continent, so to speak, with Rome and France and the Germanic tribes and all of that. What makes England different is that it is an island. And islands are unique in a way because they kind of sort of have their own boundaries. But at this time, we've got these kind of seafaring people called Vikings who go and try to claim lands for their own, in their own right. And so whoever kind of wins those battles claims the land. So we've got this territory in England, and the English, not to go off on like some long drawn out tangent, but England itself is made up of four different kind of territories or countries. You have Ireland, who was originally a colony of England, and part of Ireland is still part of England today. We'll talk about that much later. So you have Ireland, you have England, like Britain proper, you have Scotland, and you have Wales. So you've got all of these independent kind of countries that kind of make up collectively the British Isles. So England, Celtic speaking groups, they call themselves the Britons. Um, and these early Brits, they were pagans. They weren't Christians. They hadn't the spread of Christianity and the church and all that kind of stuff hadn't reached the British Isles. So they were pagans, and they believed in what was called this kind of animism, where spirits and are found everywhere, and the natural world kind of controls all aspects of existence. And these kind of priests acted as intermediaries between gods and people. And we can see the remnants of these early Celtic peoples, or the early Britons, when we look at places like, I know that you guys are all familiar with Stonehenge. Stonehenge was a product of this kind of pre-Anglo-Saxon, pre-Roman invasion, uh, the earliest of the early. And writers would say that especially in The Wanderer, when we read The Wanderer for today, or for this week, he calls these kinds of monuments like Stonehenge the work of ancient giants. So this is I lay that out because it's important to note that prior to the invasion of the Anglo-Saxons, that England is very much a pagan country that's rooted in those pagan traditions. Another British tradition that has its roots in the Celtic Britain pagan roots or pagan tradition is the myth or the legend of King Arthur. And I talked briefly about the legend of Arthur and the influence of Arthur in the themes for the unit, and we're going to talk about that a lot next week. But King Arthur is a byproduct of this pagan folklore. They're myths that are full of magic, love affairs, of adventures and enchanted lands. And the Britons and their mythology are responsible for these legends of King Arthur. And he kind of becomes this embodiment of British values, of idealism, of perfection, that the later English monarchs of the Renaissance and the 19th, the cult of Arthur, or the lasting tradition of Arthur, really has influenced England all the way up to today. So he has he's a Celtic myth. So what happens in the 5th century, and then puts an end to this idealistic kingdom of King Arthur, is the Roman invasion. And as I said earlier, maybe I didn't say earlier, maybe I deleted it from the video, but England becomes a kind of colony of the Roman Empire. It stretches its little tentacles out to the Isles of England. So, and they occupy England for about 300 years. And they're responsible for building roads, baths, walls throughout the island. I have some pictures of kind of Roman occupied England that I'll probably post them on Canvas. I'll dig them out somewhere from when I was. But the Roman invasion really kind of begins the end of pagan animism, and gives rise to Christianity. And for the 300 or so years that they are in England, they lay some groundwork, but they leave in 409 because there's trouble in Rome, and they vainly make this attempt to go back and save the fall of the empire. But when they leave Britain with no real protection, and it leaves them open to invasion, which brings us to the Anglo-Saxon invasion in 409 AD. And there are three groups of invaders. We have the Jutes, we have the Angles, and we have the Saxons. And the Jutes come from Denmark, or modern day Denmark. The Angles also come from modern day southern Denmark, and then the Saxons come from the shorelines of Germany. So this doesn't happen overnight. It takes a number of years for them to really kind of sink their teeth into England. But the Celts kind of retreat to Wales, and traces of that culture can still be found today. The Angles called the land England, which is where we have our modern day term for England. And the Romans, before I forget, called Britain Britannia. So Britain, England, all of that is the name of our the country has its roots in the people who invaded her. So not that you all care, but here are some kind of pictures of the areas of Britain, the invasion of the Anglo-Saxons. So there were, why does this matter? What is the result of this invasion? And really, for our purposes, the result of the invasion is this new imposed kind of language and values on our culture. And we'll see that when we talk about the Anglo-Saxon poetry. But the three groups, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes, they kind of have this like head-to-head, who's more powerful and all that kind of thing. But they are united finally in the 9th century by the first king of England, Alfred I, or Alfred the Great. And besides not letting the Vikings defeat England and having them hold their stay, his real claim to fame is that he and Charlemagne kind of bring into this, he's responsible for establishing Christianity in England. And the reason that that's so important is because it really helps unify the different independent properties of England. We're now united under a king, we're now united under a religion, so therefore we are more united as a people. So the first king of England and the establishment of Christianity really kind of sets a tone for a new nation with a new identity. So here's a picture of a statue of King Alfred that was taken in Winchester by me. Isn't he beautiful? Well, okay, so like I said, the spread of Christianity provides a common system of beliefs and values, but that doesn't eradicate the steadfast hold values of the Anglo-Saxons, which we'll talk about in just a second. Finally, and it's going to be kind of the end of my history lesson for the time being. In 1066, all of this changes. We have the Norman invasion, and the Normans were French invaders from Normandy, and it's William the Conqueror who brings his troops to England and defeats the Anglo-Saxon. Well, why is that important? Well, the Norman invasion brings an end to the Anglo-Saxon kind of era, and the language of Old English is replaced by an Anglo-Norman dialect. And you change the language, you kind of change. I mean, when the language changes, the politics change, the social structure changes, society changes, really, when you have that shift in language, values change. So we'll see as we move from the Anglo-Saxon poems to Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, the differences between the languages and how it kind of evolves into what looks um, like modern day English. But I'll tell you up front that Anglo-Saxon and Anglo-Norman English looks nothing like modern day English. So um, I'll be reading translation. So, anyways, and with that, the Catholic Church becomes a constant in England because France is they belong to the church, they belong to the Catholic Church, and when they get their foothold into England, the Catholic Church gets its foothold into England, and that is important. So that is kind of a brief overview of how the Anglo-Saxons came to be in England and how they lost their footing in England. So I'm going to stop this video here. And I'm going to pick up in another video for you to watch on Anglo-Saxon poetry, and then we're going to discuss the poems for this week. So hang with me and I'll be back.